CTF called Second Inside in South Korea. It was run by the South Korean government, and it was a Jeopardy CTF. So what this means is that they give us a lot of services that are vulnerable to tons of different security problems, and our job is to hack them as fast as we can before any of the other teams do. So we're doing that. It's going pretty great. I'm with the team Samurai. We're just starving through all these problems, hacking everything in sight. What we don't realize is that we're apparently pretty bad at figuring out what services are part of the CTF and what services are run by the South Korean government. So there's one service we found, we attacked it, no big deal. But then a couple hours later, the organizer of the CTF taps me on the shoulder. I'm not even joking, this guy's name is Beast. B-E-I-S-T. So he tells me to come with him, and I got really excited because I think it's going to be like a press release or something. But no, he grabs about 8 other Korean guys, they lead me into a dark room, sit me down at a table, and scream at me in South Korean for about 15 minutes. This is kind of problematic because I don't speak a word of South Korean. But I sit through it, and after the guy finishes his tirade, Beast shakes his head, looks at the other guys, looks at me, and goes, "These are very serious accusations. First, we'll be disqualifying you from the competition. Second, we'll be continuing this investigation, and we may be pressing charges." So before I knew it, I was in the middle of an interrogation with a bunch of people talking to me in a language I didn't know. And this went on for about 6 hours before we realized there was a whole misunderstanding, and they had in fact exposed one of the South Korean government servers to us during the CTF, and we had accidentally hacked it, thinking it was a problem. They brought in the American ambassador. He made a big deal apologizing to me, not realizing I was Canadian, and everyone went on with their lives. So that's the main difference between a CTF and a hackathon. At a hackathon, you build shit. At a CTF, you break shit, and sometimes you get arrested doing it. Rarely, though. So there's 2 main types of CTF. The first one is called a Jeopardy-style CTF, and it looks basically like a Jeopardy board. There's a ton of different categories, usually cryptography, forensics, web exploitation, miscellaneous, and binary exploitation. And each of these categories have a bunch of different problems, and the teams just compete to attack them in any way they can. It could range from a programming challenge that has you building a bot to play a video game, to a binary service running on some remote server that you need to attack with buffer overflows. So, yeah, again, like a hackathon, except you have very defined goals, and those goals usually involve breaking things other people built. Now, the other type of CTF is called an attack defense CTF. These are incredibly cool, but there's usually only 1 or 2 of them a year. Most notably is DEF CON CTF. It happens in Vegas every year in August, and it's kind of like the Hacker Olympics. And the way this works is every team is given a set of services, all of them vulnerable, and their job is to actually hack the other teams as quickly as they can while defending themselves against the other team's attacks. You lose points when you get hacked, you get points by hacking people, and the best part is, the only rule is usually don't get caught. So people do crazy things ranging from hiding cameras in each other's hotel rooms, to setting up microphones around the casino, or even like sending spies in to join other teams and steal information. It's just a crazy mess of people doing things that in any other sport would be considered cheating, but here are completely acceptable. That picture there is actually one I took at a CTF in Japan earlier this year, called Secon. Each of these pillars represents a service that a team was running, and they actually have like missiles flying between the services as you attacked each other. And it was just this awesome visualization that showed how many payloads everybody was throwing everywhere. It was pretty cool. So why do you do CTFs? It really boils down to a couple main reasons. And my favorite of them is that you just learn an absolute shit ton about everything. Like, I have decoded QR codes by hand. I've learned languages that like probably 5 other people in the world have ever programmed in, so that I could reverse engineer their programs and figure out how they work. And I have like found sketchy Russian people in IRC to crack passwords for me because a challenge called for it. This is just awesome stuff that you're never exposed to anywhere else legally, and it's a great way to get practice doing the sorts of things that usually only criminals get a chance to do, which is absolutely essential if you ever want a chance at defending against these people, because you can't defend against something you have no experience with. Beyond just the learning factor, it makes you a better engineer in general. Usually a CTF lasts for 3 days, and over it you do 30, 35 problems that are all completely different. And you're forced to learn something new over 2-3 hours. And by the end of it, you just come out with the ability to like grasp almost any topic almost immediately and solve problems with it. Plus, it'll just make all your code more secure almost by default, because you learn to think about your code in the mindset of an attacker, which isn't something a lot of people get an opportunity to do. Plus, it's just the most fun you can have. I do a CTF almost every weekend, and it's pretty much better than anything else I've ever done. So how do you start? The first step is realizing that you suck at CTFs. It's okay though, everybody sucks at CTFs. And it turns a lot of people off. But once you realize that it's okay that you suck at CTFs, you're just going to start learning a ton and get better much more quickly than anyone else. One of the biggest issues new people have getting into CTF is just letting go of the ego they've had for anything else they've done. This is different from anything you've done before, and you aren't going to be good at it at first, and that's okay. So just don't worry about that and dive in. You'll have a great time. Most colleges actually have a CTF team. If yours doesn't, you should start it, because you get even more experience running a CTF team than you will competing in one, and it's just a great experience. There's actually a website, ctftime.org. It's run by one of the Russian teams, Morse Chicken, I believe.
More Smoke Lead Chicken and Balalaika Crew merged to LCBC.
There's a lot of colleges in CTF. One of the Russian teams, which is probably run by the Russian government secretly, no one really knows, runs this website that tells you all the upcoming CTFs. Keeps track of like a scoreboard, kind of like MLH, where you can see how your team does over the season. And it should be the first place you check if you want to get involved. But there's two awesome ones coming up in the next month. There's Seesaw on the 18th, which is run by one of the colleges in the United States.
NYU Polytechnic.
NYU Polytechnic. And it's only for students. It's really approachable problems. You usually don't need to know too much about security to get started, and it's an absolute blast. I think it actually falls on Hack the North weekend. So if you're at Hack the North, just sit down with some friends and try doing a CTF for a few hours. You might love it. The other one is on October 17th. It's called Hitcom, and it's run by a Taiwanese team of high school students. These guys are like 12 to 14 years old. They probably like come up to here on me. And they're some of the smartest people I've ever met. And they're absolutely brilliant. Their team is called HitCon, Hacking in Taiwan Conference. And people don't like the word hacking, so no one really gives them money. So they actually made a board game about hacking that they use to fund themselves entirely. They sell this game where you play as hackers trying to hack each other, and it pays for all of their travel around the world to go to CTFs and so on. It's absolutely brilliant. I also have a link here, which you'll be able to click on later. Yep.
Are these the guys that beat the Parliament this year?
No, that was DevCore, which was basically the entirety of South Korea.
Yeah, it was the entirety of South Korea.
There's rumors the two of them were actually defectors from North Korea, but I don't know for sure whether that was the case.
Shane is a member of Samurai.
Yeah, so us three actually run the Samurai CTF team, which competed in DEF CON this year. Yeah, so this link goes to a GitHub repo called CTF, and it's basically write-ups for every problem in every CTF for the past 3 years or so. Incredible resource. Go to it for any problem you don't solve, and any problem you do solve. Because usually there's a couple different approaches to a problem, and this is the best way to find them. Yeah, so depending on what you want to learn, here's a bunch of different resources. My favorite is microencryption. It teaches you something called exploit development, which is basically buffer overflows and format string bugs and heap overflows and so on to attack binary applications. This one is run by Square, I believe, and Magistrate of Security. And it's all done entirely in a web interface where they give you a debugger, a disassembler, memory editor, and so on. And your job is to basically break into warehouses by hacking electronic locks that they have on the doors. So there's something like 18 problems, and the first one is literally, here's the password in the memory, find it and enter it. And by the last one, you're using like automated theorem provers to automatically make like crack keys and so on. Like you don't need to know anything to get started. This is how I got started. I did it all over MHacks 3 last year, and it'll teach you everything from what a Stack Overflow is, to how to exploit a heap overflow, to how to reverse engineer like a custom heap implementation. It's absolutely amazing. Hodl.kr is a site run by all those Korean teams. It's just a couple dozen problems that all have to do with reversing and exploit development. It's incredible. And they put a lot of effort into it, and it's a great way of learning anything exploit development. One of the older ones is Smash the Stack. If you've done anything with CTFs before, you've probably heard of IO Smash the Stack, or Annotaria, and things like that. There are a bunch of challenges where they actually give you credentials for a box that you SSH into, and every level, your job is to elevate your permissions to access the next level's credentials, basically. Cryptography is my personal favorite. There's not many resources for learning it, and really you just have to dive into a bunch of textbooks. But Matasano has this website, CryptoPals, which is about 7 problem sets of 10 problems each that guide you from how does base 64 work to let's perform a timing attack on elliptic curves over remote connection. And if you get through all of these, which, like, tell me if you do, because that is seriously impressive, you are going to know more about draping crypto implementations than most cryptographers can claim to. Crackme's.d is very similar to Pointable.kr. People write problems that are basically like DRM for video games. You need to enter a verification code to prove you own something. And the problem is to figure out how that verification code is calculated so that you can bypass it and unlock the software. There's hundreds of problems on there dating back to like the early 90s, and it's a really cool resource to look at. So let's look at a problem. This one is one of my favorite problems that I've done. It was from HitCon last year, and it's really interesting because it doesn't actually have anything to do with security. So it's indicative of just how little you need to know to get started with CTS. The problem was that you need to write a program that works in Python 2, Python 3, Ruby, C, and Haskell. And in all of those languages, it has to output the contents of a file named play. So that's kind of weird. You probably haven't done anything like this before. But by the time you finish this problem, you know in like intimate detail how every language is parsed and crazy tricks you can do to trick the parser and compiler into doing things it was never designed to accomplish. So no, I don't show the example, but I highly recommend giving this a try. It's one of the most fun things I've ever done. It took me like 3 days straight of no sleep, and I actually woke up at the end of it with the answers scrawled on my body in a permanent marker. It was a weird experience, but it's worth a look. So I actually made a homework problem for you guys. If you do this, we're going to send you some Tinfoil Security T-shirts. Just send your solution to MHacks@tinfoilsecurity.com. And it's kind of similar to the public law problem from the last slide. What I want you to do is write a Ruby program that outputs half the planet. That's all it has to do. But you're only allowed to use letters and spaces. No punctuation, no numbers, nothing. So find somewhere doing it, send us your answer, we'll send you some shirts, any color you want. And I don't know, if you also write a program that is able to generate arbitrary programs that do this, we're throwing like for a couple months of Tinfoil Security or something. It's a great problem. I actually did this a week or 2 ago just to see if it was possible, because someone was talking about it in a CTF somewhere, and it's really interesting how I ended up doing it. Alright, home adventure.
Stop paying attention now.
Sorry, did you need that slide?
No, so we stop paying attention.
Yeah, so Home Adventure 3. There's a CTF run every year in January at ShmooCon. It's called Ghost in the Shell Code, and for the past 3 years, they've done something called Home Adventure, where as part of the CTF, they actually make a fully playable MMORPG, where every single quest is a CTF problem, and every single quest is impossible to beat within the confines of the game. So you actually end up needing to hack this game, do things like make no-clip hacks, or aimbots, or speed hacks, and it's a really fun thing to try. I believe the servers are still up. You should take a look. But I really like this as an example for CTF because it's something that my team has never really done before. Like Borsky and I, we got started with programming because we were hacking games, but everyone else on my team kind of hates video games. They'd rather play CTFs, so they had no idea what they were doing. But we barreled through it for 3 days, ended up tying for first with Pat Harlan and Pony, and it just proves that like not knowing how to do something isn't an excuse not to do it. But the problems in this game were really cool. There's like one where you need to open a treasure chest, and as you're opening the treasure chest, you're getting attacked by bears with AK-47s. So you need to stay alive for 5 minutes while you pick this treasure chest. But it's kind of hard to pick a treasure chest while there's bears shooting at you with AK-47s. So obviously you reverse engineer the network protocol for the game and try to make your character dodge the bullets and so on. That's what playing this game is like. So I'm going to walk you through a problem that I did as part of this CTF actually. It's called Floppy's Revenge. And it played kind of like a Redstone Puzzle in Minecraft. The way it works is you enter this cave, and there's some circuits in front of you with some buttons. And you press the buttons, different circuits light up, different circuits turn off, and fairly quickly you realize that the squares represent AND gates or OR gates and exclusive OR gates. And then your goal is to find the correct order of switches to press so that the door at the end opens up. So here's an example. That's an AND gate. Just press both switches, the door opens up, you're done. It's a very easy problem. There's not much to it until you go through the door. So you walk through the door. Now there's 42 switches, hundreds of logic gates, and it's a little bit overwhelming, especially because your character can't fly. So let's make your character fly so that you can actually reverse engineer this circuit. Then start diving into it. So how would you guys approach this problem? Any ideas? Yep.
Probably start by seeing what switch does it.
Okay. So yeah, first we did that. Found out what switches were OR gates, SOR gates, and so on. Yep.
See if you can go and figure out what the program wants to see in the end.
Okay.
And then just give it that directly.
Okay. So if you can't do that, but I guess probably the first thing you want to do is try to map out that circuit. So that doesn't sound too hard. Let's spend a couple hours doing it, and let's actually team up with one of our teammates' 4-year-old son, because kids love Minecraft. I actually did this problem with a 4-year-old kid, and he absolutely loved it. I couldn't have done it without him, because there's a lot of work here involved in reverse engineering all of those cables. So I was sitting there hunched over a laptop with this 4-year-old kid flying around this game, and basically Minecraft, like writing down circuits on paper. It was like the most adorable thing I've ever seen. And at the end of it, we ended up with the scariest Excel spreadsheet anyone has ever seen. This is actually like a fully programmed Excel spreadsheet where you put in the state of the switches on the left. It calculates the state of every logic gate and tells you whether or not the door is open. So we got here. We realized that we had been up for about 18 hours and we couldn't think straight. So we started pressing random buttons on here until the door opened. Because that's much faster than flying to the other end of the room every time you change the switches. So we did that for a while, found the answer, and opened the door. But that's not very interesting. How would you actually solve the problem? Any ideas? If you know what the circuit looks like, how do you figure out what inputs you need to give it so that the door at the end opens?
Excel.
Excel's one way. All right, so this is actually a Boolean Satisfiability problem. We have a logic gate, or we have a logic circuit. It looks like switch 1 and switch 2, XOR the output switch 1 and switch 8, and so on. And this goes on for a long time. So what we do is we map Boolean satisfiability to the game. We decide that 1 means that like a circuit is activated, or a wire is activated, meaning the door opens. 0 means the opposite. Then we encode the entire program as a Boolean satisfiability problem. So once we actually have that giant equation, does anyone know how you find the answer? So that's, sorry?
Set solver? Right?
Exactly. So enter Z3. Z3 is an automated theorem prover created by Microsoft Research. You basically encode theorems into it in a dialect of Lisp. Then it does really scary Microsoft math stuff that I am not going to pretend to understand, and either tells you, yes, this theorem is true, here's a proof, or no, this theorem is false, and here's a proof. In our case, our theorem is that the giant Boolean expression is satisfiable. That is, there's inputs that make it resolve to 1. And a proof of that theorem is literally just a set of inputs that result in evaluating to 1. So here I've actually given an example where we encoded the equation from the previous page, A or B and C equals 1. If you're unfamiliar with those symbols, it's just the standard AND and OR when you're dealing with like predicate logic and so on. But we can plug that into Z3 with something like that. We run it, and it tells us, oh, one of the answers is A is 1, B is 0, C is 1. Is that one of the answers? Yes, it is. That's the second one on the list. So Z3 did what we were able to do in about half a second of looking at the equation. But it gets a little bit more complicated when you're dealing with 42 inputs and this many gates. So you start transcribing it, you get something I'm not going to get into because it's just painful. And there's a full write-up available online there, but the summary is that it outputs the switches you need to press to open the door, And lo and behold, it works. And now you are one of the only teams to solve this problem because everyone else is lazy.
How long did the Microsoft Stat Solver take to get that answer?
I was instantaneous, basically.
Wow.
How long did it take you to solve the problem overall from start to finish?
I think it was somewhere between 12 and 18 hours. Around the 10-hour mark, time starts to flow together.
You did the Z3 solution after the CTF.
Yeah, so that's an important point. Like I knew Z3 existed during the CTF. I had no idea how to use it. I didn't know how to properly solve this problem. But it doesn't matter how you solve a problem in a CTF. All that matters is that you get the solution. So I did what I knew, which was making an Excel spreadsheet. Which, sure, it's a stupid solution, but it worked. I learned a ton doing it, and now I know how to solve it properly. When you're getting into this stuff, you are going to know the proper solutions to these things, but don't worry about it. Do what you think is right. You might get it, you might not, but you're going to learn something regardless. So let's use steganography now. Steganography is very distinct from encryption, which a lot of people actually make the mistake of equating the two. Encryption is about having a secret message that everybody knows is there and knows is secret, but then not being able to read it, probably because they don't have a private key or something of the sort. Whereas steganography is about hiding the fact that there's a message there in the first place. So if you go to Wikipedia and look up steganography, I believe the example they give is actually a picture of a cat, which you can run through a programming link, and it pops out a message about cats being awesome. Usually this happens with like images, sounds, PDFs, or whatever. One common and trick you can do with images is just wiping away the least significant bits of every pixel in the image and sticking your message in there. The least significant bit isn't going to drastically affect the color, so you end up with an image that looks almost the same, but you've managed to hide information within the same channel. And if you don't know to look for it, you probably won't find it. So let's look at a problem from No Con Name last year. This is a Spanish CTF, and it was called Stegosaurus, and they just gave you a 3-minute audio recording of the Hacker Manifesto, which is some poem that got really popular in the 90s. So when you get an MP3 file, usually the first thing you should do is open it in Audacity or something of the sort. This is just the waveform for it, which doesn't really tell us much. But let's look at the spectrograph, which is frequency stuff. I'm not an audio engineer, but there's a bunch of stuff going on here, and something looks strange here. Does anyone see it? Take your time. It's not obvious at first, but there's a weird pattern. Yep.
It's something like a binary pattern?
Yeah. So let's make that easier to see. Do you know how you would do that? Anyone? If you've done any digital signals course, you may have been exposed to this. Not a Fourier transform. All right, so there's something you can do called a low-pass filter. And you put in a frequency threshold, and anything below that frequency, in the spectrograph, it shows up with like a lower amplification or whatever, and anything above that frequency becomes much more obvious to see. So Audacity has support for doing low-pass filters. Let's run it on the thing, and whoa, exactly what you said is there. There's like these big pulses and these short pulses, and I don't know. What do we do from here? Any ideas? What was it?
Try to figure out the code. Might be like something like, I don't know, having code or something.
Okay. So one thing that kind of stands out here is that it looks like there's long pulses and short pulses. Does anyone know what that might map to? Zeros and ones, possibly. In this
Morse
case,
code.
it's not zeros and ones, and it is Morse code. Wow. So, congratulations. Earlier you told me you know nothing about security. You just solved like a 400-point Stego problem. So, I was supposed to show you the slide earlier. So yeah, it's Morse code. All of us obviously know Morse code, right? So just go through the spectrograph, reading it, transcribing it to ASCII, and whoa, it's NCN, giant hex thing. That's not interesting, but it's the play because the CTF is called NCN. So you won. Congrats. So there's a few tools you're probably going to need if you do CTF. I unfortunately didn't really get into binding exploitation or reverse engineering because that stuff gets really technical and it's hard to distill into 15 minutes at the end of the talk. But you're probably going to want Wireshark, which is a network analysis tool. It's really sweet. It can dissect pretty much any networking protocol you can think of, from TCP to HTTPS to USB traffic, believe it or not. And Wireshark is awesome, but it's also one of the most vulnerable pieces of software ever written. When I was at that conference in Korea last year, one of my teammates actually gave a talk where he wrote an exploit that worked across 3 different versions of Wireshark on every single operating system. And he went up on the stage and he opened up a virtual machine that had one version of Wireshark in Windows. He opened up another virtual machine that had a different version of Wireshark on Mac. Opened up another virtual machine that had a different version of Wireshark on Linux. Then from his host machine, he sent some fancy packet he constructed over the network, and on every single virtual machine, a calculator opened. So this is actually a trick that a lot of teams use at DEF CON or other attack defense CTFs, because most people use Wireshark to analyze packets. So if you can hack Wireshark, you can hack your competitors. And if you can hack your competitors, you can steal their answers, wipe their hard drives, and basically prevent them from having any fun whatsoever, which is more or less the goal in attack defense CTFs. So yeah, Wireshark is great, but be careful if you're using it. Keep it in a virtual machine, and don't bring it to an attack defense CTF. Another great tool is IDA Pro. It stands for the Interactive Disassembler A.
It's just the interactive disassembler.
Oh, okay. That explains the A. So it opens up binary files for pretty much any architecture you can think of, and turns the shellcode into assembly. If you have like super expensive versions that you probably don't because you're not the NSA, you can also turn that assembly into C code, and it just makes it, I'm not going to say easy to reverse engineer binaries, but it gives you a chance. And it's fairly expensive, but I believe they actually have a student license you can get for cheap. And there's an evaluation copy for an older version that will suit you for most purposes.
There's also actually a free version that's just an older version.
Yep. If you don't want to pay or you don't want to use an old version, there's Ollie Debug and Hopper. Ollie Debug is a Windows debugger that a lot of the people in CTF actually probably grew up using when they were hacking games or whatever back in the 90s. And Hopper, very similar to IDA. Other tools you want are Binjitsu, which is also one of these Chrome tools. It's a Python library made by one of my teammates, Zach Hill. And it basically does all the tedious work of writing an exploit for a binary. It does things like dealing with endianness and connecting to remote servers, running SSH, running different programs, and just gets rid of all the tedium so that you can work on actually solving problems instead of thinking about what order to write your numbers in and things like that. So there's a link there. Definitely worth checking out if you do microcorrection or Puzzle.kr, any of those other things I looked at. Oh, GeoHop. This beautiful face here is GeoHop. How many of you have a rooted iPhone?
Jailbroken iPhone.
Or jailbroken iPhone? Okay, I saw 1 or 2 hands. Well, if you have ever jailbroken an iPhone or used one, it's because of this guy. This guy made the first tethered jailbreak, I believe. A jailbreak basically gives you root access to your iPhone and allows you to do all that awesome, fun stuff that Apple doesn't want you to do, like pirating apps or tethering when AT&T says that that's a horrible idea. And he's also known for breaking the signing algorithms on the PlayStation 3. They were using ECDSA to verify that when you loaded disks up to the PlayStation that they weren't tampered with or that you actually have permission to run them and so on. But because cryptography is really hard, they actually reused a parameter that you're only supposed to use once. It's called a nonce. He found that out, broke their signing algorithm, and then people were able to play party games in Homebrew and so on. He got sued by PlayStation, he settled out of court, but he'll forever be famous for it. Now GeoHop's interesting. He's an incredibly smart guy, and he does really well at CTF, but he actually plays on his own. He doesn't play with a team, he plays under the pseudonym Tom Cruise. And if he's playing with CTF, even though he's on his own, he's probably going to finish either first or in the top 3 at least. So how does he do it? And it really boils down to the fact that there's no such thing as cheating. DEF CON qualifiers last year, for example, there's this problem called no name yet. There's a PHP web server, and there was a very trivial way of getting remote code execution. It let you upload files, and you could tried to upload files that were constructed in such a way that it would let you execute code on the server as the user running the web service. So that was easy. But from there was a second part of the problem, where while logged in as the web service, you had to attack another binary that was running as root. And that part was hard. Everybody found the first solution within 10 minutes, and it was probably a good 6 hours before anyone cracked part 2. So Jeopardy saw that, and he decided that he wasn't going to bother with part 2. Instead, he decided to look for where the organizers messed up. So he found that the bash aliases file for root was actually world writable. I don't know why it was world writable, but he used this to his advantage, and he stuck a backdoor in there, such that if a shell was ever spawned as the root user, it would connect to his server back home and send the answer to him. So he did that. He moved on to another problem. A couple hours later, another team solved the problem, logged in as root, and the answer appeared on his machine. It was an absolute brilliant solution, and the organizers loved it because CTF doesn't have cheating. CTF has cleverness. Now, there's actually an Apple CTF going on probably in about 15 minutes or so. They're running a security talk right now where they're teaching developers how to secure web applications. And then afterwards, they're going to be hosting a web application CTF. They're giving all of you guys access to MacBook Pros or something, running some servers, and your job is to hack them. First team to hack everything, get some really awesome prizes. So if you're doing that, which I highly recommend because I talked to the guys running it, and it sounds like it'll be a lot of fun. You're going to want to look up SQL injection, XSS injection, cross-site request forgery, and here I've got a link to the OWASP cheat sheet. It's just a giant wiki article that lists basically every attack you can perform on a web application and gives examples of how to do it. If any of you do the CTF afterwards and you're running into issues, feel free to shoot me an email or find me and I'd be happy to help out. So here's an example of the sort of thing you're probably seeing on my list. Does anyone know what the problem is here?
You're not sanitizing the input.
Okay, so what does that mean?
So in this case, what you could do is you could put in your name as some valid name, and then also put like a semicolon and a valid SQL expression.
Yeah,
And you could just say drop table, and then there goes the entire thing.
You could drop tables, or you could do something much more interesting, like logging in as Donald Trump to this website, doing basically the exact payload you gave. But, sorry, what's your favorite color? I've been meaning to throw these at people for the whole contest, but I forgot, so actually, here's a bunch of stuff now. I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't be throwing warheads at a crowd of people, but, yeah, here's yours.
I said watch the ripple.
Yeah, so what Dakota said is that because the input is sanitized, you can actually create a malformed SQL expression, which is going to do not what it intended to do, but what you intended to do. And in this case, that is saying that you want to log into the user whose username is Donald Trump and whose password is either the empty string or ID equals 1. In this case, Donald Trump is the first user because he is probably the most important person on this website. So you're successfully logged in as Donald Trump. Cool. That's an example of something you might see in the CTF. A few other... Sorry, you have a question? No. All right. Yeah, so go do the Apple CTF. It's going to be awesome. And if you win, let me know. I'll give you 6 months free of Tinfoil Security. Don't tell them I'm doing that because it's their CTF and they want to take the credit for the prizes and stuff. But yeah, I'm here all night. If you want to talk cryptography, let me know. I love cryptography. Yep.
Is there a danger in rooting your Android device?
Yes, absolutely. So it's a lot of fun. I rooted mine because I like to live dangerously, but it gives so just as it gives you a ton of control over your device, it gives attackers a ton of control over your device. And things like malware can be a lot more dangerous when they have root access. And yeah, I wouldn't do it on any phone that matters to you, but it can be a fun thing to play around with. Yeah, I love crypto. If you're doing anything with crypto, let me know. I want to see it. And otherwise, I'd be happy to look at any web apps or anything you're working on, see if there's any security vulnerabilities, talk about them, show you how to fix them. Yep.
Is there a way we can get a PowerPoint?
Yes. I
Next slide.
Yeah, it's on the next slide.
Okay, sorry.
Cool. If you do start playing CTF, let me know. My email address is there. And yeah, if you get stuck on any problems and any upcoming CTFs or whatever, let me know. I can probably shoot some hints your way or introduce you to some other teams. Maybe you're in the same city as some of the big players or whatever. So yeah, the slides are available at that link there. Those ones will probably be updated later on today and replaced with a link to a SlideShare page. But for the time being, you can find everything there. Any questions? I'll be here for the next 10 minutes or so if anyone wants questions. Then I'm heading over to the Apple CTF.